Now, there's an interesting statement in the Quran that God made a covenant, an agreement with all of the prophets. Remember, we came across this word covenant previously. Testament, agreement, ahad. God made an ahad with the previous prophets. Lama ataytukum min you're being given a book. ثُمَّ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ. Then a prophet is going to come to you. لَتُؤْمِنُنَّ بِهِ وَلَتَنْصُرُنَّ. You are to believe in him and to help him. So it is part of the Muslim faith that previous prophets, all in a chain, in a link together, have in fact supported and helped each other. And prophets, in fact, indicated to their people that what they are preaching is not the be-all and end-all, the final revelation from God. In fact, one wouldn't find in any of the teachings of the previous prophets that any one of them says that, okay, this is it, that's the last of it, nothing more is going to be said by God forever. Neither Moses nor Jesus is reported to have said this. In fact, it is noted in the New Testament of the Christian Bible that after Jesus there were many persons who were called prophets, but not to the extent that Muslims understand a prophet to be. But persons who spoke by some kind of inspiration from God were called prophets in the New Testament, which indicates that as far as the New Testament is concerned, there is nothing to say that Jesus is the last and the final prophet. When we look at the Bible more closely, we see that in fact there are prophets who spoke about someone to come after them. The prophet Moses, for example, in Deuteronomy, in chapter 18, in verses 12 to 18, is commanded by God to tell the people that God is going to raise up another prophet like Moses, who will come from the brethren of the Israelites. And God will put his words into the mouth of that prophet. And he will then prophesy, telling them about the things to come in the future. Muslims believe that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in fact fulfilled that prediction, and that he is the prophet like Moses. If not the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we would be hard-pressed to find an individual who actually has fulfilled that role of being the prophet like Moses. Now, some have thought that perhaps Jesus, on whom be peace, may have fulfilled that role. But in the New Testament, there is a very interesting statement that Peter, a disciple of Jesus, after Jesus had ascended into heaven, now preaches to people. And he tells them that the time of restoration must arrive. And in the meantime, Jesus must remain in heaven. And the time of restoration that he speaks about is the time when that prophet will come. That was spoken about already by the prophet Moses, the one who is going to be like the prophet Moses. Now, if you put two and two together, what Peter is saying here leaves some ambiguity. Does he mean that when Jesus comes back, Jesus will be that prophet like Moses? Or does he mean that the time of restoration in the future will come, the prophet who is going to be like Moses will come, and then eventually Jesus will come back in that era? There is some ambiguity there. But apart from this ambiguity, what is clear is that Peter is saying that so far, Jesus is in heaven already. He had been here. He lived among us. God took him up. And so far, that prophet who was to be like the prophet Moses hasn't come yet. That much is entirely clear. Read the Acts of the Apostles, chapters 2 and 3, for the speech of Peter in the New Testament of the Holy Bible. So then, Muslims feel that there is good evidence for holding that the Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace, was that prophet who was to be like Jesus. And it is by virtue of the Muslim belief in Jesus, by virtue of the Muslim belief in the Prophet Muhammad as a prophet of God, that Muslims are able to believe in Christians also as people of faith, and more specifically in the Christ as a man of God and as a prophet, a messenger of God, as one of the Ulul Azam, one of the 5 great messengers of God. In some of my interactions with some of our Christian colleagues, what I have found is that some have misunderstood this point, and they have thought that okay, so we have Muslims believing in Muhammad and believing in Jesus. So we don't want them to believe in Muhammad, so let's attack Muhammad, peace be upon him, so they can stop believing in Muhammad, and then all they will have left is Jesus. But they have misunderstood the case, because the truth of the matter is that Muslims believe in Jesus because they believe in Muhammad. And if Muslims did not believe in Muhammad, peace be upon him, probably they would not have believed in Jesus. So it is very important that when missionaries try to approach Muslims, they should not use that approach, because that is an approach which in fact falls flat on its face. Some others have in fact recognized that in order to appeal to Muslims, one would have to appeal to the things that Muslims already believe and hold dear. And one would have to try to appreciate and understand the message of Islam. Finally, before I leave you, I want to share with you some comments which show the manner in which some Christians who have been studying Islam in modern times have appreciated the message of Islam. So, we have in Canada the United Church of Canada, which is one of the largest Christian denominations in Canada. And what they have said about Islam is quite interesting. On their website, you can still find a document they produced entitled, "That We May Know Each Other." And that title of the document comes from where? I'm going to ask you now. Where does the title of that document come from? That We May Know Each Other. What does that remind you of? Huh? Somebody saying it, apart from Sheikh Tawfiq, anyone else? Surah Al-Hujurat, yes. لَتَعَارَفُوا, that they may know each other. Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th chapter of the Quran, and verse number 13 says, we have created people and made them into nations and tribes, لَتَعَارَفُوا, so that they should know each other. Which means, on the other hand, they shouldn't be fighting and being in conflict with each other, but they should try to recognize the goodness of each other and try to live in harmony. So these folks have in fact reached out to Muslims by using that title of the document that they produced, and that was a groundbreaking document, because in that document, for the first time, this major Christian denomination came forward to acknowledge, with some nuances, that the Prophet Muhammad is in fact a prophet from God. And I'd like to read for you their statement as is found in that document on page 33, and as I said, you can go to their website and print that document. They said, Christians cannot, of course, affirm Muhammad as the seal of the prophets. To do so would mean affirming for Christians the primacy of the Quran over the gospel of Jesus. However, we believe that it is possible for Christians to affirm Muhammad as one of a number of unique voices who followed in the prophetic traditions of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Or, in other words, to affirm the prophetic witness of Muhammad. And that comes, in fact, after a whole discussion about how far Christians can continue to remain Christians and yet say something positive about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There have been others as well who have acknowledged that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, must have in some way been a prophet of God. Previously we mentioned the story from the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses speaks about a prophet to come after him. Can I get some sense of the time remaining for this talk, Brother Adil? 5 minutes, okay. So I will wrap up even before that, very quickly. William Montgomery Watt, reflecting on that story, has this to say in his book, Muslim-Christian Encounters, Perceptions and Misperceptions. Very interesting book. He says, the passage in Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verses 14 to 19, in which Moses says to the Israelites that God will raise up for them from among their brothers a prophet like himself, seem to state a general principle, namely, that when God's people need divine guidance or other help, God will send a prophet to give them that. This principle could be taken to be fulfilled in the whole series of prophets who, throughout many centuries, guided the Israelites. The later Jews thought it applied to the coming of the Messiah, and it was taken in this sense by the early Christians and applied to Jesus. And he refers to Acts chapter 3, verses 22 and forward. From this standpoint, he continues, a Christian can admit that in a sense, it also applies to Muhammad. And so the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is slowly becoming recognized by Christians and others to have been a prophet and messenger of God as well. And this is, in fact, encouraging for Muslims because they have been a large segment of our recent history that has been colored by the attacks and innuendos that have been made against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we are coming now to a phase in which people are really coming to know each other, just like the Quran says, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so that they should know each other. People are now studying Islam from the original sources. They're reading the Quran. They're reading the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the original Arabic sources. And they are now getting the information not secondhand from others who have colored the information with their own misapprehensions and their misunderstandings about the faith and the Prophet behind the faith. But now they're getting the information directly, and they're coming to recognize that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was in fact like the prophets of the children of Israel. So if one opens up the Bible and reads the stories of the prophets, one finds that that is very similar to the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his manner of receiving a revelation from God, particularly the way in which the story of Muhammad shows that the angel came and put the words into his mouth, reflecting a prophecy that was already given in the book of Deuteronomy. One last thing very quickly. In the book of Genesis, it is mentioned that God promised Abraham that he will bless the descendants of Ishmael. Now we know, and it is widely acknowledged, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was in fact a descendant of Ishmael. Now, in what other way was the descendants of Ishmael blessed? Were the descendants of Ishmael blessed? They were blessed spiritually through the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and this is the most prominent thing that we know about that. It is interesting in this regard to notice that in commenting upon Genesis chapter 17, verse number 20, we find in the Chumash is a Jewish Bible commentary edited by Rabbi Nosson Sherman and Rabbi Meir Zlotowicz. On page 78 of that very important commentary, we find the following reflection on that verse, chapter 17, verse number 20 of the book of Genesis. This is what the authors wrote, and I quote, "We see from the prophecy in this verse that 2,337 years elapsed before the Arabs, Ishmael's descendants, became a great nation with the rise of Islam in 624 CE. Now they're very specific about the dates and about the number of years from the time the prophecy was uttered until the manifestation of the results of that prophecy. So basically they're saying, look, Genesis chapter 17, verse number 20, God says to Abraham, I will bless Ishmael and I will bless his descendants. And this is how the blessing of his descendants come to be manifested now with the rise